So I want to add my welcome to everyone for attending and for visiting, albeit virtually. I regret that, but our department, Civil and Environmental Engineering, as well as Northwestern. So I have two goals this morning. One is to give you a, whoops, that jumped fast. Hold on a sec, there we go. One is to give you a sense of what we do at Northwestern intellectually and how our department, our researchers, and our university are extremely unique. I've heard the array of research interests you have, and so I think that you're all going to find a really satisfying and inspiring intellectual home here. And so what I show here in this little collage is the fact that, you know, there's a big emphasis on materials here, of course, and more that's becoming biological. And when you say biology, I'm an environmental engineer, by the way, as many of you know, you cannot ignore the model that nature provides us in ecological systems. I'm showing, is that okay? Should I thought I heard someone. Okay.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I would love it if people just, if they wanted to ask me a question at some point, you just shout out. I have my gallery here at the bottom, and I think I can see, whoops. Okay, I should stop playing around with this. All right, so what I'm showing here as well are, the fact that we're exploring bikeable communities, autonomous vehicles. There is a big emphasis, of course, on cities, and maybe that was a point I wanted to make if I just go back here. Two of the really I think novel and interesting things about Northwestern is the fact that we're in Chicago, right? Which I show here, which we have a beautiful view of. And of course, the fact that we're on Lake Michigan. All right, so this is, you're going to see today that there are surprising connections among thinkers in our department, among the scholars, among the kind of research we do. And so our work spans scales from molecular and nano to a regional scale, from systems like coral reefs to structural systems like the Hancock Tower. And I know it's not called the Hancock Tower anymore, but it is to me. So I hate it when they change the names of iconic buildings. We are an extremely collaborative place as well. So I'm going to show you how in our department, we're taking these ideas very seriously and really have decided to reorganize the way that we approach research. It's no longer tidily tucked in discrete silos of environmental engineering or transportation or structural mechanics or geotechnical. We are really our collaboration is truly a living and evolving endeavor. And so many of the challenges that we face as researchers, as citizens of the world, are system challenges. As an environmental engineer, I can't help but think that climate is our biggest challenge, but there are so many other challenges related to that. There's social equity challenges, racial justice challenges. There are challenges in trying to understand complex, heterogeneous materials. So in that vein, we've decided that system challenges require systems thinking. And so this is how we're beginning to think about ourselves. And in fact, on Monday, our website will, we're gonna launch kind of a new research section of our website. So we now think of our research in these four systems: material systems, ecosystems, urban systems, and human systems. And this will be, it's a small change maybe, but this is how you'll find this on the website. And I just want to give you a few examples. So in material systems, I think there's 7 or 8 different research topics in this area. I'm just showing you 2 of them. Biomaterials. Here is an image from out of Angie O'Connell's lab, and I believe it's on cortical bone. And so the range here is macromolecular compositions, cortical bone, bone scaffolds, biofilms. A number of you mentioned your interest in that. Whiskers and follicles, believe it or not, biosensors. I am really Okay, there and nanomaterials, and of course, the nanomaterial revolution now is probably 25 years old. We look at engineered nanomaterials, but we also look at those nanomaterials that are present in environmental systems, and we look at the unintended consequences of nanomaterials. This is a picture out of Lumiere Aristide's lab, and I believe that it's showing hydrodynamics in mineral nanopores. In the ecosystem area, many of you mentioned microbial processes, biotechnology. I'm showing an image here out of George Wells' lab, looking at biofilms. And we look at biofilms not just about who's there and what they're doing, but we're also very concerned about their mechanical behavior. And so that's where we show kind of this active interdisciplinary approach. And then we have urban systems. Civil and environmental engineers made cities livable. And now I think our challenge is to make them sustainable and equitable. Energy is a huge concern under that large urban system umbrella, although we're also looking at resource recovery and reuse, climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, water treatment, structures and infrastructure, automation, and geosystems. So all of this is under one umbrella in a very active collaborative fashion. This is a picture out of Alessandro Rodoloria's lab, where he's looking at how the subsurface and the shallow subsurface is a real store of potential energy that we don't tap. We don't understand and we don't tap it. And then finally, human systems. Human systems includes data science and smart cities, modeling and network analysis, public health, urban planning and design, and policy. This is an image from Amanda Sitopoulos' group. And you see the wide array of topics that we pursue in this area, once again, from a variety of different perspectives. Okay, so what I'm showing here is that while you'll certainly be taking classes and doing research in civil and environmental engineering, we collaborate across boundaries here within the McCormick School of Engineering. And we also have endeavors that exceed, Northwestern. I show here the International Space Station, and this is a system that Erica Hartman has been working on. I think this is a graphene nanostructure. There's a NASA challenge that students and Gianluca Cusatis designed a habitat on Mars. This is a synthetic biology group, and really it's a slightly old picture. I did look for a newer picture. Nada has since left, and Lumiere Aristide has since arrived. There is a wonderful collaboration going on looking at science and art. This is Matthew Tremner. You probably met him already, standing by our large-scale 3D printing, and here is a robot, and then Jim Hamilton by his robot. So there's a lot of robotics going on in our department as well. We have world-class facilities that support all of these endeavors. And here is the advanced photon source at Argonne National Lab, where X-ray based science is conducted. These facilities are unmatched in most places throughout the country. And what they do is they just really turbocharge our research. Okay, so if you were here on campus today, you would be wearing sunglasses, and it might look like this. But when you come here next September, our campus will look a little bit more like this. It's really an extremely beautiful, beautiful campus, as I've mentioned, on the shores, right on the shores of the Great Lakes. So what I want to do now is to just sort of hit some of the features of being at Northwestern, the things you can do when you're not working. Because that's as important too. The decision you're going to make about where to go to graduate school is a decision about where you're going to live for the next 4 to 5 years. So Northwestern, as you probably well know, is a school that has an excellent music school and a theater school. And this is a new building on South Campus that has just this exquisite, well, it has a number of concert halls, but this exquisite concert hall, which of course gives you this impressive vista of Chicago. This is Pick Steiger. So it's incredible, the concert, not just the venues, but the people that visit here to give concerts, and it's really cheap, really inexpensive. The recreation in this area is phenomenal. You know, my kids grew up at the beach, and no one believed they were from Chicago. Yes, we have beaches in Chicago. And in fact, in the summer, you may spend a fair amount of time, and there's windsurfing on the lake. I have another picture here, mostly for Jim Hamilton. Okay, and recreation. So the winter recreation, of course, we have snow. Now, we don't have mountains, we have snow, but you can still do cross-country skiing. And hopefully you'll continue running and exercising along the lake. So let me say just a few things about Chicago. I have to say I love cities. This is absolutely one of my favorite cities. I've lived in Baltimore. I know one of you had mentioned Baltimore. I've lived in Paris. I've lived in Miami. So I've lived in quite a few cities, and Chicago is still one of my favorites. Great sports, wonderful comedy. It's got great restaurants, particularly ethnic restaurants, neighborhood-based. This is just a picture of Millennium Park, which in fact also is the largest green roof in the world. Here is the Arts Institute. Green Mill is a great bar if you're not a classical music fan and you want to have jazz. That's down in, I think it's in Uptown. I'm not entirely, Alyssa would know, I'm not entirely sure.
It's Uptown.
That's right.
Okay, good. Thank you, Melissa. So it's been a while since I've been there. Anyway, and then of course, over the summer, there are so many music festivals in down in the city, down at the park. This may be where Obama gave his victory speech at Grant Park. All right, and so Chicago is the home of 20th century and 21st century architecture. Now, I don't know how many of you know what this building is that I'm pointing to. This is an early photo because it doesn't quite have the name on it. Does anyone know?
It's Trump Tower.
It's Trump Tower, which is a really beautiful building, but I hate the fact that they had the white blazing letters across it. Here is Wrigley Tower. So this is on the river, and there are architectural boat tours in Chicago, downtown Chicago, that are just wonderful. Alessandro, I need to have a picture of where you live because you're just across from this, right? Next year, I'm going to replace Trump Tower with your tower, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, and so here are the Marina Towers, also iconic. Shed Aquarium. I love this. This is the Pritzker Bandshell that's also at Millennium Park, and it's designed by, and I'm sure many of you know, this is designed by Frank Gehry. I am so glad I wasn't the structural engineer on this, but it is so cool, I think. And then of course the Fieldwood Museum. Does anyone know what this building is? Do we have any architectural aficionados here? So this is the Aqua Tower. It was designed by Jeannie Gang, and Jeannie Gang is a Chicago architect. She's one of the few women architects who does tall buildings. She has a new building that's even taller, but I guess I love the fact that it's very close to the Okay, so I was out walking the other night, and this was just a picture along the lake, which I thought was really good. Can you all hear me all right? I just got a message that it was, okay.
Yeah.
My internet was unstable. And so this is a picture from my garden. I really like my tree peony. So I just want you to know that Chicago half the year is not overcast and cold. I'm probably more than half the year, you know, in fact, it's quite beautiful. And this is for you, Jim, because what you see here are surfers on the lake. All right, so the lake, we don't have tides, but it can be very, very windy, as you know, and it really does kick up a lot of waves. And so every now and then I send these pictures to Jim to say, who lived for a long time in Australia, and I think he misses surfing, but he could surf on the lake.
I haven't tried it yet, but it is possible. Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't tried it yet. Well, you've got to remedy that. All right. So I close with a picture from an event that Melissa planned a couple of years ago. I think what we'll do is we'll plan something like this again in the fall to welcome you all. This of course is on our, it's the, I don't know, we call it the Lakeville. It's the sort of a park area that's right at Northwestern's shore of Chicago. So with that, I hope I've given you a view, a slightly more comprehensive view of what your intellectual and just your life could be at Northwestern. And if you have, I'm gonna see you periodically over the day. We also have a lot of videos that I think will allow you, give you a deeper vision into what I've gone over. So I don't know, does anyone have a quick question?
Any question for Professor Gray?
All right, well, I'm
Okay.
gonna quit sharing. Hold on a sec. There we go, we're back.
So thank you, Kim.
You're so welcome.
We are perfectly on time, actually 2 minutes ahead of time. I don't
know what the pandemic is doing to me. It is all of my bad habits are being, rectified. I'm kind of okay. Well, go. Great.
So then our next speaker is Elisa Borowski. She's a PhD candidate in the transportation program. Elisa.
All right, thank you. I'm just pulling up my slides. Make sure I can make these big. All right, can everyone see my slides okay? Good, all right, thank you.
All right.
All right, so good morning or whatever time of day it is from where you're tuning in from. My name is Elisa Borowski. I'm a 4th year PhD candidate and I'm focusing in the area of transportation engineering. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about life in Evanston and Chicago and also my research. I focus on kind of the human side of engineering, looking at mobility resilience. So to start off, welcome to our open house, although it is virtual. These are some pictures that I took when I came to the open house 4 years ago on actually this exact day, February 5th, 2017. And I just fell in love with the campus. It is so beautiful, and the buildings, the landscaping, the people there, it was a really magical experience. And I'm sorry that you can't be there in person right now, but I hope that you will have a chance to be there in person very soon. Life in Evanston is just breathtakingly gorgeous. We have the lake right along our campus. There are gardens around campus, like tucked away around the libraries. There's the Shakespeare Garden. There are beautiful walkways and bike paths throughout Evanston. It's very pedestrian friendly, easy to get around without a car, and just a really beautiful place to live. And I lived there my first year at Northwestern. I currently live in Chicago, and it's just like a 10-minute train ride to campus when I'm working on campus when it's not a pandemic. So it's really convenient. You have a lot of options where to live. Some of the things that have made Chicago really feel like home for me when it's not the pandemic. In my neighborhood, there's a feminist bookstore called Women and Children First, and they have a lot of really fun events and great speakers come and talk. We have a really fun Pride Parade. There's Dia de los Muertos celebrations, gelato tacos, just so many fun, beautiful, colorful things to experience and celebrate. I'm showing here the 77 different community areas of Chicago. Each neighborhood really has its own culture, its own flavor, and there's just so much to experience and explore. I feel so grateful to be spending my time at graduate school here in Chicago. And during the pandemic, there is still a lot to do. There's a lot of outdoor dining, outdoor farmers markets, shared streets, so you can go and be socially distant, but still see people and feel like you're part of a community. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about my background. So I actually have a bachelor's degree in English and anthropology from the University of New Mexico. And studying those topics, I really developed my passion for studying human behavior and communication and how our emotions and our identities influence our behavior. And then after taking a few years off from school, I went back to get my master's also at the University of New Mexico in structural engineering, which is just another interest of mine. And there I really developed an interest in solving problems and designing experiments, statistical analysis, computational modeling. And I just really love all of these things. And when I was deciding to go for my PhD, I knew that I wanted to find a place where I could embrace all of these interests at the same time, because if I'm just in one area, I feel like I'm missing something from the other side. So that's when I discovered Northwestern and their whole brain engineering initiative, where they really hold in equal regard these more like left brain skills and right brain skills. So they put like equal emphasis on analysis, logic, synthesis, math, sequencing, computation, as well as more intuitive thinking, metaphorical thought, creative problem solving. And so I saw this and it just felt so familiar to me in the way that I naturally think about problems and the way I like naturally approach things. And so that's what drew me to Northwestern. Professor Gray mentioned this as well. One of the really unique things about our engineering department here is that instead of the more traditional departments that have very separate subdisciplines, here we have, the 4 subdisciplines of environmental, geotechnics, mechanical, and transportation. But we really think about the way that we can all work together to tackle shared goals together and really appreciate the interconnectedness of these various systems and how they all depend on one another. And each one of these systems is very interesting to study in and of itself, but it becomes, I think, even more interesting when we think about how they all work together. All right, and so within that, I'm in the transportation department, and how I ended up in transportation was really because I was inspired by the research of my now advisor, Professor Amanda Stathopoulos. She runs the Mobility and Behavior Lab here at Northwestern, and she really emphasizes the human aspects of sustainable mobility systems and looking at how these transformative sharing and on-demand systems fit into how our human behavior, I guess, interacts with these systems. And we look at transformative mobility in our lab. And so we think about how we can meet the mobility needs of diverse populations using these emergent technologies. And what I mean by that, we really focus on on-demand mobility, and that is a very wide umbrella that captures all these different systems. So whether it's just like crowdsourcing resources or help through technology, or hailing rides, using bike share, e-scooters, shipping packages, or automated delivery. These are all things that people in my lab have studied and are currently studying. And we really focus on critical solutions. So not only do we think about how these smart technology solutions can address these significant problems that our cities face, but we also have to ask ourselves, are these innovations contributing to solving these problems, or could they actually be inadvertently exacerbating some of these challenges? And that includes road congestion, CO2 emissions, social inequities, and exclusion from these systems. So in general, we ask, what problems are these solving, but also what problems might we be creating? And we think about this from a community perspective, and we think about the importance of engaging our communities in the design, development, and implementation of these solutions. We think about who is using and benefiting from these innovations and who isn't. We think about how these different community beliefs and cultures affect the adoption of these technologies, and also how different communities view transportation policies in different ways. And this mural here on the upper right, actually my colleague Alec helped paint this mural when he was working with the community in Humboldt Park, and he was doing focus groups on the adoption of Divvy bike share. So these are complex problems. I have here a picture from my master's thesis where I was studying long-term stowage and deployment of carbon fiber reinforced polymer composites. And that was a complex problem, but I think once you bring humans into the mix, it becomes just, I don't know, exponentially more interesting and complex and challenging, and it's really fun. So to study these problems, we look at a very wide scale of data, ranging from micro to macro. So we look at interviews and do sentiment analysis. We use surveys and choice experiments to look at different perceptions. We use spatiotemporal analysis of different community areas, and also network modeling to look at the adoption of these mobility options over space and time. And so within that, I really focus on mobility resilience. So looking at evacuation behavior during climate disasters, and also more small scale transportation disruptions. And I'm interested in how we can design a more resilient future through innovation analysis and design. And these on-demand shared mobility systems that we study are flexible and adaptive, so they have the potential to improve resilience. But we also have to ask, is this efficient, is it equitable, and is it safe? And so I also bring a lot of perspectives from sociology literature. I'm interested in looking at peer influence, social capital, perception of risk, and also identity, and how these factors influence the different transportation modes that individuals select during a disruption, and how they influence transportation behavior overall. So this is an example of a choice experiment that I've designed. So sometimes we present hypothetical evacuation scenarios to survey respondents and say, what would you do in this situation? And here are your options. Here are the different modes that are available. Here are the time and cost and distance parameters. And what would you do? And then we can take that data and estimate a model to see what the weight and significance of these different parameters are, so that we can design our policies and our transportation systems around that information. I've also looked at transit disruptions across the city of Chicago, and where ride hailing like Uber and Lyft are used to fill gaps when the train just isn't running unexpectedly for whatever reason. And we found very different behaviors when we looked at the north side of the city, the more affluent side of the city. We see a very high shift over to Uber and Lyft. And then in more of the southern and western quadrants of the city, we didn't see that behavior. And so this starts to show a social inequity in the options available to people to be more resilient when a transportation disruption occurs. I'm also currently doing some research on the pandemic, and this is funded in part by the Natural Hazards Center. And I'm looking at how social distancing is affecting our ability to access our social resources, how it's affecting our social networks, how it is impacting our willingness to share with strangers, whether we are more willing or less willing to share, and also what types of people we're willing to access different types of resources from, whether it's our family or strangers or using crowdsourcing. So one of the really great things also about Northwestern is that there is a lot of freedom to explore interdisciplinary coursework. I've had the amazing opportunity to work with experts in all of these different fields, from industrial engineering, media technology and society, and psychology. And you can take courses that interest you in these different areas. You can bring your research interests and your data into the course and apply the tools, the analytical tools that they're teaching, to find new insights in that data. And it's just a really great way to work in an interdisciplinary setting like that. There's also a lot of encouragement for student-led research. So in two of the courses that I took my first year, I ended up publishing on the projects that I started. And the first was a survey methods course that I took with my advisor, and I had the opportunity to study emergency evacuations and looking at how the way evacuation messages are constructed affects decision-making, how our emotions and our identity affect decision-making. So that was, I got to put a lot of my interests into that project, and I was really proud when it was published. And then also in a course that I took actually on traffic flow, I was able to study social media effects on adopting Divvy Bike Share. So that just goes to show how open professors are to you bringing your passions into their field of expertise, and working with you and supporting you and getting that published. And finally, I've from a less academic standpoint, I guess, I've had this great opportunity to serve this year on the Social Equity and Racial Justice Committee in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. And so we are always interested in improving and making our community better. And so if that's something that interests you and you're passionate about, we invite you to join us in just making our community a better place. So with that, I thank you, and I invite you to ask any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Elisa. This was excellent. Any question? Any question for Elisa?
I have one.
Oh,
Yes,
So
please.
this is Heather.
Yes,
Hi.
Heather.
So I'm curious, I guess, how do you find, like, in your, and this might depend on your interests, but like in studying the more social aspects of these engineering solutions, do you feel like you still have like a pretty solid technical base? Like, I know that's kind of a goofy question, but
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yeah, it's a very broad technical base. Like I bring in different, it's like qualitative and quantitative methods, a mixed methods way of analyzing data. And so I think, yeah, I think, I don't know exactly how to answer that, but yeah, I mean, like the coursework is basically dedicated to data analysis and developing the more technical tools, and then researching, like reading papers on sociological perspectives is something that I do more for fun, I guess, or like what I do outside of coursework. So so yeah, I think that there's room for developing a good balance of those two things.
well, you bring, I mean,
Thank you. Any?
oh, can I just, so Alyssa, I mean, I think you bring.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you're very comfortable bringing analytic tools, data science tools to these, you know, what an engineer might perceive as a social question. But this is where but then the feedback is that with that analysis, we can make meaningful decisions and develop policies to improve, you know, to improve how people operate in cities, how communities operate. So it's a huge advantage for, and I think we don't do it enough in teaching our engineers that we really are very well equipped to ask and answer socially based questions. I loved how you have better city pictures than I do, and it's probably because you. What neighborhood do you live in?
So I live in Andersonville.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is really pretty close. So.
Yeah, it is.
Any other
Okay.
questions? Great question, Heather. Anyone else?
Okay. Thank you. So we can move to the next presentation, and we have Professor Akono. She's an assistant professor in our Mechanics, Materials, and Structures program. Angie?
Okay, good. Hi, let me go ahead and share my screen. Good. So today I'm going to be talking, hi and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about moving, building resilience, and thriving. And I'm just going to use a lot of metaphor. I was very excited when I was writing this talk. Building resilience is a term that really came aloud when we think about pandemic, and what we saw was just literally communities coming together and just drawing in themselves the force to heal and think about a brighter future in this case. Moving is something that we want you to do. We want you to move and to come here at Northwestern and be extremely successful. And throughout your graduate studies, you are going to need a lot of resilience. And we also want you to thrive. That's something that we really want you to do. So I'm just kind of going to talk about this. So moving, I've done my fair share of moving. And I'm just going to give a little bit of the story, very short story. I've moved from hot to cold weather. So I was born and raised in Douala, Cameroon. So Cameroon is it's a country in Central Africa. In this case, very tropical weather, really, really hot. And then there's a couple of dots. So I'm just kind of illustrating some of the more salient point of my story. So I went to undergraduate studies, some of these dots in France, a little bit colder. And then after that, I went for graduate school on the East Coast, much, much more colder. Then after more experiences, then I've been in Northwestern for 4 years in this case. Definitely colder. I'm also not going to miss chances. We're talking about images of the cities. I love Chicago. That's just like one of those cities. I've been to a lot of big cities, Paris, Cambridge, Madrid, and I think Chicago is my favorite one. So I just kind of brag a little bit about Chicago. This is the John Hancock building that you're going to see with the braces. And I completely recommend you if you have time to go to the Lincoln Park. So as I moved, I also built my lab. So my lab is a sustainability and nanomechanics laboratory. In my lab, what we really do is to work at the intersection of 3 disciplines. So we have material science, understanding the behavior of materials. And then we have applied mechanics. For applied mechanics, we really want to understand the ability of material to resist, to carry out stress transfers and to dissipate mechanical energy. And everything that we're doing is really focused at the nanoscale. So trying to understand how to structure property at the nanoscale enable material either to dissipate energy or to transfer load, or to some extent, to be able to resist failure events. So then I'm going to go into building resilience. And the question that I'm going to ask, what does that mean, building resilience, within the context of civil engineering, within the context of infrastructures, within the context of building, what does that mean? So one aspect of it is just looking at the material itself, looking at concrete and looking at the standard, the current standard that we had is ordinary Portland cement concrete, and trying to think, well, we need something that is better. How better? It has to be greener. It has to be stronger. It has to be tougher. It has to be greener means that we really need to reduce the carbon footprint of the current concrete that we have. And the reason why we have it, the compelling reason, is really this figure, and that is the figure of 5%. 5% then, 8% now. And this is the contribution of the cement industry to man-made greenhouse gas emissions. So it was 5% 10 years ago, and it is 8% now. Now, the reason of it is because part of it is the manufacture process of cement that involves grinding raw materials and heating them at a very high temperature of 1500 degrees Celsius. And throughout the process, we are releasing a lot of greenhouse gas emission, a significant amount. In fact, to be able to synthesize 1 ton of cement, one needs to release 1 ton of CO2. Now, if you take that into account, along with the large volume of cement and concrete consumed worldwide, and let me give you a figure. So cement is an essential element in concrete, and the production of concrete, the annual production of concrete in the world is estimated at around 16 billion tons. So that's the equivalent of 2.5 tons per individual in this case. So that's a very huge number. And that explains why currently we are accounting, the cement industry account for 8% of the greenhouse gas emission. Now, if you want to be able to meet the Paris Climate Agreement, so the Paris Climate Agreement is to make sure that over our century, the temperature rise is not going to reach 2 degrees, knowing that we've already exceeded 1 degree Celsius, with, in this case, 2018 being the hottest year. So if we want to be able to make sure that we meet those agreements, we really have to make drastic changes in our lifestyle. And one of them is to look at our infrastructure materials, to look at concrete, and to think about how can we reduce the carbon footprint of concrete. So this is what we do in my lab, where we are investigating novel formulation of concrete that would be lightweight and that would be greener. In terms of just like carbon footprint, we are looking to achieve up to 80% reduction in the carbon footprint of concrete. And we also want to make it lightweight. We also want to be able to have 30 to 40% reduction into the weight. Because if you think about it from the structural engineering perspective, if you can use a lightweight material and achieve the same level of performance, then you're significantly reducing the dead load and you're making room for active load, for the live load in your structure. So this is something that we are trying actively to do. But we don't just want to have lightweight and green concrete with the same standard. We want lightweight and green concrete that has an improved performance in terms of resistance to load, resistance to fracture, and even durability. So to be able to achieve that, what we do is to use a multi-scale approach. So you have at the macroscopic level, you have the cement or the new concrete that we're working on. And then you're going to have at the meso scale, this kind of heterogeneous microstructure. And then at the micro scale, you have a different, still heterogeneous microstructure all the way to the molecular level. And we really want to understand how does the microstructure at each different level influence the behavior at the next level? What are the connection and the synergy that we have, and how can we create new synergies? So for instance, if we were to look, this is actually one example or one snapshot of our concrete, where at the micro scale, you're going to have a microporous material, you have a matrix, and then you have pore. And at the nano scale, you have a nanoporous. But then we also see that you have different morphologies. At the micro scale, you have this clear matrix, and then you have pores in it. And then in nano scale, it's more kind of what we call a disordered structure where there's no clear matrix. You have both pore, and then you also have, in this case, grains. And these differences in morphologies are going to lead to different reaction when it comes to stress transfer. At the nanoscale, for instance, the mechanical energy is going to be dissipated by frictional contact between the grain, and you have rearrangement of the different pores. However, at the microscopic line scale, it is primarily the matrix that dissipates the energy, and the grains are going to be detrimental. So you really have this dual role of porosity, where in one case it's going to be detrimental, microscopic nanoscale, and in one case it is positive, nanoscale. And then the question that we're asking is, okay, from a material scientist perspective, how do I control that design? How do I control by trying to reduce the microporosity in one case and increase nanoporosity? And these are some of the questions that we are asking in my lab. Then we actually even go further about what about the structural disorder? What about thinking about randomness? That is, if I give you a composite, you have a matrix and then you have inclusion, and I keep that the volume fraction of inclusion constant, but I just change the spatial arrangement of it. How does that influence the mechanical properties? That is very important also because as we are formulating new design or new type of materials, we want to be able to predict their behavior and to quantify the certainty that we have on that number, to understand the different ranges for the values of the mechanical properties and how are they affected by the level of disorder, structural disorder that we are perceiving in our structure. So that is really one aspect that we want to be able to understand. Another aspect that we are working on is really characterizing the different phases. And we use a lot of high throughput experimental testing. So we carry a large amount of experimental tests in my lab, and then we apply machine learning method. And based on this, we want to be able to identify what are the different phases in this case, and how do these different phases contribute to the strength of our material? How do they strengthen our material? But then we can also link it to the design. So we work a lot with nanomaterial, carbon nanotube, multi-wall carbon nanotube, carbon nanofiber, graphene nanoplatelets. And we want to understand also from the processing perspective, how do we incorporate those nanomaterials within the matrix? And then how does this affect the microstructure? How does that create disorder or lead to a more homogeneous microstructure? And how does that yield enhancement in strength, going back to making concrete more resilient? Then we want to have concrete that is tougher. We want to have concrete that resists crack propagation. Again, you've probably seen driving a crack in the road, a crack in a building, and you definitely don't want to have crack in foundation. That is highly dangerous in this case. And a lot of time you're going to see that also you have a lot of fractures. So we want to be able to understand how do we prevent it? How do we make concrete that is going to be more resistant to cracking? So what we do in my lab is to be able to generate small crack at the microscopic length scale And then we're going to observe it and to understand what are the different mechanisms by which the material is going to resist fracture propagation, and how can we create new mechanisms? How can we tailor our design to make our material tougher and more crack resistant? So then the next step is going to be thriving. So for thriving, I'm going to link it to a public health issue. And the public health issue is, how do we solve the issue of large bone defect? So what is bone defect? So it is just shown here in this picture. It is when you have a hole, a gaping hole in your structure. And then you may ask, well, in which case are you going to have a hole in a bone, for instance, in a tibia? When is this going to happen, for instance? Well, I'm going to tell you the story of Emma Cummings. So Emma Cummings is a bone cancer survivor. So 6 years ago in 2016, in this case, well, she was a 13-year-old girl going happily about her life, and then she got cancer. The cancer did not originate in the bone, but it spread to the bone and it formed what we call osteocarcinoma in this case. So she went through several cycles of therapy, in this case, a very long process. Ultimately, it was successful. However, they had to remove the tumor. The tumor had located in her tibia. So they removed the tumor in her tibia by conducting a surgery, and this led to the creation of a hole. And then to be able to fix that critical hole, what they did was to harvest a little bit of a knee to be able to fill in the tibia in this case. Thankfully, the operation was successful, hence you can see the smile on the picture. And what she wants to know now, or then 2016, what she said she wanted to do during the photo shoot was to have a normal life, to play sports, to socialize with her friends, and ultimately to be pretty. So this is really what we want to do. The issue is just that, again, I told you to be able to after curing the cancer, to prevent the spread, what they did was to remove the tumor, so remove a portion of her tibia, and then they replace it by taking a portion of her knee. So this is what we call an autologous graft. The limitation with that is that sometimes, a lot of times, the supply is limited. So currently there are 15 million procedures that are being conducted worldwide for autologous graft, and really the supply is very limited. And also the reconstruction step, if you want to harvest the knee, it's not going to have the same shape as a tibia. Well, it's going to be challenging. So this means that a lot of time you have what you call post-surgery complications, and you have also a reduced quality of life in this case. So what is currently being done in the clinical world is to find alternative. So this is our model. This is cortical bone. This is the ultimate standard that we're trying to replicate. And these are some of the substitutes. We have a ceramic one, we have a polymeric one, we have a metallic one. Now we already have one limitation, and that limitation is structure. So if you see in cortical bone, the size of the defect is in the order of hundreds of microns. But if you look at currently, the current alternative, that clinical alternative, they have defect in the size of millimeter size. So what it means is that we have limited vascularization that is going to take place, but we're also going to have limited nerve development. And that goes back again to recovering full function. But the other point is going to be stress transfer. And I'm going to illustrate it in the metallic scaffold. A metallic scaffold is going to be way stiffer compared to normal bone, which means that there's going to be what we call stress shielding. So the bone is not receiving all the stress. And this is going to impair the bone formation. Because again, if you think about it, physical rehabilitation is very important and highly recommended, especially after leg injury or musculoskeletal trauma, because bone grow in reaction to stress, in reaction to measured repeated stress. But if you want to shield it, then you're going to have, again, limited regrowth that is going to occur. So the current alternative they fall really short from cortical bone. And what we do in my lab is to be able to develop new alternatives. So in terms of alternatives, so I already talked about kind of this challenge of meeting both the structure and the mechanical properties of bone, but then you also have functionalities. And that is what I call the 3 Bs of an ideal bone scaffold. So we have bioinductive. It has to promote bone formation. Biocompatible, it has to enable new cells to be able to live and thriving. And biodegradable, it has to be temporary because eventually we have to remove it. So this is an example of one of the bone scaffold that we are designing in my lab. So we're really trying to repeat that bone architecture where you're going to have defect from different sizes, from the nanoscale up to the meso and microscopic length scale. And we also want to have this mix using composite materials design of both random and yet highly ordered structure in this case. And I'm just going to show you some recent results that we obtained. We got them, that was just like last week, like fresh out of the incubator. So this is a cell, and this cell is just kind of just laying and having a great time on my scaffold. So the cell initially, it was just kind of a little seed. So it was like little, it was kind of a round disc, and that I seated on my scaffold, and I put the media and then kind of nurturing environment. And I waited a couple of days and then I observed it. And I see that while it's not dying, it's living. That's really good. But it's also really having a great time. It is stretching in all kinds of directions. It is enjoying the time that it's spending on my scaffold, and I love it. And more importantly, it is building connections. It is starting to build tiny little connections attaching here to my scaffold. And you know what is next? Well, this cell is going to start migrating. It's going to go and find its friends. And then my cell is going to multiply and form its community. We call it proliferating. Then together, they're going to build a very highly ordered system. We call it differentiating. And then they're going to start making me some bone because I want the bone, because I want my scaffold. My scaffold is going to disappear and I want the bone that this cell is creating. So this is what I want you to be. We want you to be little cells coming here, and then you're going to multiply. You're going to make friends. You're going to build your communities, and then you're going to thrive. I have a picture that is representing that. We want you to come over here. We want you to make friends. We want you to build communities. We want you to thrive, and we want you to create something new. So thank you very much. And I want to finish with this picture. So that is a Buckingham fountain. I absolutely recommend to come and visit it. And that would be all for me.
Thank you, Angie. This was excellent. Any question for Professor Akono? Is there any question?
Thank you, Angie. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. It is 10:15, so we are 5 minutes ahead of time. We now have a break, just a 10 minutes break. So we come back here in 10 minutes exactly at 10:25 US Central Time. And you can get your cup of coffee if you're in the middle of the night or if you're in the morning. We will be back here in 10 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, Erica, how you doing?
I'm okay, thanks. How are you?
Good. I love Fridays because they have a New York Times news quiz. But for the life of me, I can't. They asked a Super Bowl question, like, how am I supposed to know?
The Super Bowl isn't even real this year. It's not a real football season. It doesn't count. It's horrible. No one likes Tom Brady. Get out.
Yeah, but
These are my opinions. These are my opinions, of course.
And Melissa, thank you for sharing that. This was a historical question. Like, when was the last time a Super Bowl was located close to where one of the home teams was? I mean, it goes on and on. And it was at Stanford. Who knew they ever played in like 1985? They played a Super Bowl at the Stanford Stadium. I mean, who knew that? That's an unfair question.
Yeah, that's not something anyone cares
Then
about.
there was a pop quiz, a pop culture one I didn't get, about there's some pop star who's qualified for the Olympics in the butterfly. And of course,
What? Who's that?
Oh, I'll tell you. Hold on a sec. Cody Simpson. Like, who's Cody Simpson? Do you know who that is?
I think he has a duet with Justin Bieber, and that's the only reason I know that. Fun fact, I have personally been to 3 Justin Bieber concerts, and I am a grown woman. I am a true believer. I have followed him since he was like on YouTube before he got signed. So I'm a very loyal person, if nothing else.
That's true. That's sort of like me having gone to Michael Jackson concerts.
Oh, so jealous.
Well, and
That's so fun.
Yeah, it was in Paris. That even made it more fun.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's one thing I miss the most is live music.
Yeah,
That's how I miss it so much.
And
I've done a couple streamings, but it's not the same.
Oh, not the same. And going to a concert. And I wonder if we'll ever feel safe again doing that, because you're in very confined.
No, I can't imagine. Like someone touching me that I don't know, absolutely not.
Though,
like shoulders brushing? No,
I know.
Unsubscribe.
Well, it will happen.
I know.
It won't happen for a while, but anyway. Well, good. I'm glad. So now, Melissa, I have something on you. You like Justin Bieber, okay?
Love him, love him. It's my one flaw. It's my one flaw.
Melissa, you complain about the Super Bowl, but that's what we do in Chicago, only because the Bears are never in the Super Bowl. There's been in the last, I don't know how many years.
I know. My brother wanted to name our dog Jim McMahon. My mom shot that down. We went with Rusty. He was a golden retriever. Okay,
let's get started. So our next speaker is Professor Erica Hartman. She's an assistant professor in the Environmental Engineering and Science program here in our department. So, Erica.
All right, hello. Let's see. Have to do the obligatory, how do I do this? Share the screen, start the presentation. Can everyone see and hear okay? Fabulous, okay. So I'm excited to be part of this virtual open house. I hope you guys have been enjoying the virtual events so far. Like everyone, I'm really looking forward to life resuming. Especially, I think this summer was really surreal because I don't know if you guys have talked about it, but Chicago in the summer is magical. It's just the greatest place on earth. It's like nonstop street parties and music festivals, and the weather's lovely, and we still have lovely weather, but so definitely looking forward to that and to being able to resume normal life. But in the meantime, I think this is an awesome chance to get to meet, and I look forward to talking with many of you over lunch or in one-on-one meetings this afternoon. But right now, what I'm going to talk about a little bit is some of the things that my lab is interested in. We have a pretty big, pretty diverse group with a lot of really, really cool, really interesting research going on. And so I'm going to focus on a few projects and a few things that I can highlight here. My student, Jiashan Shen, also is giving a presentation this afternoon that I believe the environmental engineering and science students will see And if you have more questions about any of this, or just want to reach out, please go ahead. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Erica M. Hartman. Okay, so what I'm going to focus on right now is chemistry and the indoor microbiome. So this is the chemicals that we use in our everyday lives and the microbes that surround us in the places in which we live and work and spend 90% of our time. So I think at this point, many of us are aware that the built environment, the rooms around us are not, in fact, sterile, that they're covered with microbes. There's one in particular that everyone's worried about right now. But even before that, they were covered with microbes. And even after that, they will still be covered with microbes. And one of the main reasons for that is that we are giant walking bioreactors. We have microbes on our skin, in our mouths, in our gut. And these microbes are critical because they protect us from infection. They help us digest our food. They help regulate our moods even. There are all kinds of things that our microbes do for us that we should be eternally grateful for. So thank your microbes today. And you can thank them by eating a high fiber diet. All right. But everywhere we go, we actually shed what some people have called a microbial aura. So you're shedding your microbes around you all of the time. And if you happen to be in a space with someone bumping shoulders in a club once music performances resume, you will be sharing your microbes with your neighbor, and that's fine for the most part. It's totally fine. But there are, of course, a few microbes that we want to prevent from sharing. But we'll talk about that later. Mostly though, what we're sharing are skin-associated bacteria. And so a few studies that, not done by myself, but historically in the field of the built environment microbiome, have looked at the types of microbes that we find on indoor surfaces. And by and large, a lot of what we see is microbes that are associated with the human skin. And that makes sense because one of the main things that we're doing with a lot of these surfaces is touching them, right? So, cabinets you're opening with your hands, that kind of thing. So this makes a lot of sense. We see a lot of human skin associated bacteria and a lot of human associated microbes in these spaces that we're occupying for huge periods of time. And some work that my lab has done is to look specifically in athletic facilities. And we were looking at this idea of how many human associated microbes are there versus how many microbes there are from other environments. And we found a couple of different factors that tended to influence the proportion of human-sourced microbes, so how many human-associated microbes there are in a space. And one of the things that we found is that there are more human-associated microbes in spaces that do not have operable windows or an exterior door. So this is this idea that ventilation plays an important role in determining the indoor microbiome, the types of microbes that we find indoors. So if you can open a window, you're going to bring in more outdoor microbes. You're going to dilute the human-associated microbes. You're going to potentially give those human-associated microbes a venue to escape. And that's, for example, one of the really important engineering strategies that have arisen in the times of COVID, and thinking about how we can reduce the risk of sharing unwanted microbes with our friends and compatriots. Another interesting thing that we found as part of this study is that there were more human-associated microbes in spaces that were cleaned daily with what we're calling chemical cleaning. So using actual cleaning products as opposed to just like sweeping. And we don't really know why that is. And I thought it was a really interesting association. Just in general, I'm really interested in how cleaning affects the microbes that we find indoors, because nominally we're cleaning in order to get rid of microbes, but in actual fact, that's not exactly how it works. So maybe this activity that many of us take for granted as just a thing that we do, I'd like to look at under a closer lens. So in general, we can conclude that microbiomes of the built environment, the microbes that are around us all the time in our habitats, are shaped by human activity and a variety of selective pressures. So that could be things like whether we have windows that open or close, or what we're doing in an actual space, the activities that we're doing, how we're cleaning and maintaining that space, how many people are in the space, all kinds of things like that. And this is really important when we're thinking about how to design and maintain spaces exactly to promote human health. So how do we make sure that we have good, healthy microbiomes and that we're not accidentally creating like closed, awful places where everybody gets sick, because that's not what we want, obviously. And very recently, I just want to highlight this study because it was really fun. We did a study where we looked at the toothbrush microbiome. So toothbrushes are a really unique compartment within the built environment because it's it's an engineered, part of the built environment. It's something that we make and that we interact with a lot, hopefully, presumably. And it's something that we interact with in a very specific sort of way. We put it in our mouths and we use it to clean our teeth. So we have this opportunity for oral associated microbes to get onto the toothbrush and for toothbrush associated microbes to get into our mouths. And that is just an interesting sort of environment, I think, to study. It's also interesting because it experiences periodic wetting. So we know water is really important for microbes. And it also experiences a variety of different chemical residues. So whatever is in your toothbrush or whatever oral or personal care products you're using. And there's also this idea floating around that every time you flush the toilet, you're aerosolizing certain fecal associated microbes. And so part of the question that I wanted to answer here is, are there actually a bunch of fecal associated microbes on your toothbrush if you are, as in this picture, leaving your toothbrush on the ledge of the sink right next to the toilet? So, the important questions that drive research. And in general, we basically were comparing how many of the microbes we find on toothbrushes are also found in the human mouth versus the human gut. You can rest assured we did not actually find a whole bunch of gut associated microbes. So the whole toilet aerosol thing is probably not a huge amount of concern. But what's really interesting is that in general, the microbes that we find in your mouth are more, less diverse than what we find on toothbrushes. And we were trying to figure out what drives the diversity of microbes on toothbrushes. And a couple of the things that sort of popped out that are very weakly associated, but also statistically significant, were things that correlated with oral hygiene. So how often you brush your teeth and where you store your toothbrush, whether it's on the sink top ledge or whether you keep it like in a closed cabinet. So there are potentially some things that we could look into further if we're really concerned about microbes on our toothbrushes and ways to better clean and maintain our toothbrushes as example built environments. And one other interesting thing that we looked at here is that in general, toothbrush microbiomes have more diverse antibiotic resistance genes. And we were actually able to go back and find out what these antibiotic resistance genes are and where they were coming from, which is really important because antibiotic resistance, it may not feel like it right this instant, but it's a huge, huge global public health challenge. Right now, obviously, we're dealing with a very immediate pressing public health issue, but in general, antibiotic resistance, it's already responsible for some 20 to 30,000 deaths per year in the United States, and that number is expected to increase something like tenfold by 2050. And it's not just in the US, it is worldwide. So this is a really big issue because we've been sort of living in this golden era of being able to prevent and cure infectious diseases. And a lot of people are really concerned that that golden era is ending and that infectious diseases will become a much bigger issue than it already is. So everything that we can do to help prevent this issue is a good thing. And we don't really know why we see antibiotic resistance in built environments, but I have a sneaking suspicion that part of it has to do with chemistry, the types of chemicals that we use. And we use these chemicals in a large part to prevent the spread of those pathogens, of the microbes that we don't want to be sharing with each other. And those can be things like antimicrobials that we add to our toothpaste. So here I'm showing triclosan. We also have antimicrobial personal care products like soaps. And then of course there are prescription antimicrobials. So those are going to be your antibiotic drugs, or what I'm showing here is a topical antiseptic. So that's something that, for example, you might rub on your skin before you get an IV line inserted. Hopefully no one's doing that right now. But just a little note on antimicrobials in general. So these come in different classes. And we have biocides that are really, really broad spectrum. They're used to basically try to kill everything. Those are going to be like the disinfectants that we're currently probably overusing on a lot of surfaces. And then within that, we have things that are antimicrobial. Again, broadly speaking, these are going to target bacteria, fungi, viruses, and protozoa. And in a lot of ways, what we're concerned about is a connection between broad spectrum antimicrobials and specific antibiotics. So antibiotics are effective against bacteria, but not viruses. And antibiotic resistance and resistance to those antibiotic drugs is a really critical issue. That's one of the big things that we're trying to prevent. So as I mentioned, the built environment is heavily sanitized, so we can have antibacterial hand soaps. I think that's probably the product that most people would think of when they think about antibacterial products. But we also find antimicrobials in things like the world's supposedly best pencil, which is protected by microban. So oddly enough, this pencil, for reasons that I will never understand, has an antimicrobial embedded in the paint around the pencil. I don't know. You can also find added antimicrobials in toothpastes, as well as a lot of plastic products. So high touch products like this keyboard, but also a lot of things that you might find in your kitchen. You can get antimicrobial cutting boards or knife handles. A lot of baby toys and baby products, things like that, can all contain embedded antimicrobials. And then carpets, tile, laminate floors, paints, all of these, the actual things that we build our built environments out of can also contain antimicrobials. And so there's a huge amount of these chemicals that are being used, and this was true before the pandemic, and it is even more true now. So one of the issues with antimicrobial chemicals, as with sort of all chemicals, is that they move around. This is this idea of fate and transport, which is one of the key things in environmental engineering. So in indoor environments, we have chemicals that come in from outdoor sources. So that might be air pollution, for example, or things that you're tracking in on your shoes. But what I'm really concerned about are these indoor sources, the actual materials that we're using in our personal care products. And once these chemicals are introduced to the built environment, they partition as they are wont based on their chemical properties. So some of them are going to volatilize and be in the gas phase. Some of them are going to absorb to suspended particles. Eventually, all of that winds up settling into dust. And throughout, these different chemicals can encounter the indoor microbiome. The microbes that we've already established are all around us all the time. And so I invite you going forward to think about built environments, the rooms that we live in, maybe even your toothbrush, not just as a static object, but as a dynamic chemical and biological system where chemicals are moving around, microbes are moving around, and all of these things are interacting. And of course, we're there too. And one of the big reasons that I'm concerned about the chemistry of indoor environments is because where we have antimicrobials, we almost inevitably see an increase in antimicrobial resistance. So everywhere where the microbes are together with the antimicrobials, the microbes have an opportunity to either develop or get enriched for antibiotic resistance. And this can come in many different forms. So for example, on the bottom, I'm showing transformation. So that means there's potentially some interesting chemical reactions going on around us that we're not necessarily predicting. But it can also be through things like multi-drug efflux, which is a really big deal because a lot of these efflux systems are not super specific. And that's what leads to when you have exposure to an antimicrobial, potentially also being resistant to critically important antibiotic drugs. So these are a couple of really interesting and also problematic strategies that microbes use to resist the chemicals that we're exposing them to. Just as an aside, we're also interested not just in live microbes, but also dead ones because of the phenomenon known as horizontal gene transfer. So as we come into the built environment, we are of course depositing our microbes. Microbes are also coming in from outdoor environments, for example, an open window if you're lucky enough to have one, and if it's not freezing cold out. And so all of these microbes come together in potentially dust, and then those can be kicked back up and you can be exposed to those microbes. So that might be an important source of exposure, especially for young children in their developing immune system, but it could also be a potential source of infection. But in addition to that, even dead microbes could potentially play a role here in the transfer of antibiotic resistance genes. So it's possible that these antibiotic resistance genes are actually mobile and moving between microbes, even potentially if some of them are dead. So just a fascinating thing that microbes do, because microbes are fascinating. So we've done a lot of different studies in this area. We, for example, did a study looking at triclosan, which was commonly found in toothpaste and other goods. It's ubiquitous in indoor dust and linked to antibiotic efflux. It's also linked to horizontal transfer of mobile antibiotic resistance genes. So we have a lot of reasons to be concerned. So we went to a bunch of athletic facilities. This is the data that I showed earlier in the talk. And we measured triclosan in indoor dust. We also looked at antibiotic resistance genes, and we also cultured antibiotic resistant bacteria. And we were able to show that in dust samples where we had higher concentrations of triclosan, we enriched for microbes that were resistant to more different antibiotics. And we showed that both using the sequencing data and the culture data. For some reason, this is not advancing. There we go. So triclosan has largely been banned in the United States and replaced with benzalkonium chloride. So we are now following up, and we have a lot of work in this area looking at benzalkonium chloride, which is a quaternary ammonium compound that's present in hand soaps and also in biocidal paints. It's also the active ingredient of Lysol wipes, or one of a related chemical is the active ingredient of Lysol wipes. One of the interesting things about benzalkonium chloride is that it's ineffective against spores. So I already mentioned that when we're cleaning, we're not really removing all of the microbes. And in this case, we might be selecting for a very specific type of microbes, which is interesting. So we have, like I said, several studies in this area. One of the early ones that we did was actually looking at different surfaces that were painted with these different paints, and whether the paints actually were more effective. And the short answer is no. Microbes on painted surfaces just die. But what was interesting is they don't all die, and the ones that survive are slightly different on the surfaces that were painted with microbicidal paint rather than either a conventional paint or an all-natural clay paint. So just some fun work in that area. And we have a lot of more developing projects in that area as well. We're also interested, as I mentioned, in medically relevant drugs. So for example, chlorhexidine, which is used as a topical antiseptic for humans and animals. It's also used as a mouthwash to treat gingivitis. So going back to that idea of oral health. Speaking of oral health, we also have a paper on antimicrobial toothbrush bristles, which are embedded with nano zinc and nano silver, and looking at the fate of those antimicrobials. So I won't talk too much about that, except that just to highlight that one environment that we're really interested in terms of chlorhexidine is the ICU environment within the hospital, and that's what Jashan, I think, is talking about later. So the overarching question here is, how do microbe chemical interactions affect the indoor exposome? And so ultimately, how do all of these things impact human health, and how can we all have healthier indoor environments? And if this is of interest to you, you can read more about it. So our toothbrush study got a little bit of press that's been pretty fun. You can also read more about my personal take on cleaning in the age of coronavirus. There's a whole bunch of articles that I was cited in, and a whole bunch of interesting information out there. So you can visit the lab website. You can also find me, as I mentioned, on Twitter, where I like to share a lot of the popular media stuff. So I obviously have to thank everyone in my lab. I have a really fabulous lab group. This is an old picture. Unfortunately, one day we'll take a better one, a newer one, and all of our different sources of funding. And I think maybe we have like a minute or two for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have time for questions. So any question?
I know this is like drinking from a fire hose, so no worries.
Well, no seminar or talk would be complete without me asking a question. So, Erica, have you seen the latest research on the relationship between oral health and Alzheimer's disease?
Oh, no, but I'm not surprised.
Really, really interesting. I'll have to send you this, but there is and it's a little bit more correlation based. I'm not sure how mechanistically founded it is, but the correlation between people with Alzheimer's disease and I guess gingivitis is very, very high, and it makes sense, right? I mean, that's an entry point.
Yeah.
So I'll get you the citation because I thought you might like that.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I think oral health is a generally underappreciated area of human health.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and I think probably all of the various hygiene products and practices that we have could stand to be improved by some scientific data. So yeah, anyway, like I said, anyone who has questions, I look forward to talking to people either over lunch or this afternoon. Feel free to send me an email, reach out over social media, all of those things, and enjoy the rest of the open house.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we can move on to the next speaker. Anthony Landivar Mashas is a PhD candidate in the geomechanics and geotechnical engineering program. Anthony?
Thank you, Professor. Let me share the screen.
Perfect.
You can hear me well, everything?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, hello everyone. Welcome once again. I think the 6th welcome to the open house. I hope you're enjoying it, and I hope you enjoy what's the rest of it. My name is Antonio Landivar Macias. I'm a PhD candidate at the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. Today I'm here to introduce the geomechanics group at Northwestern, basically to tell you what we do and how through research we are changing the world. So before we get started, let me begin with some doomsday facts. So this planet that we live in is facing a variety of challenges related to rapidly increasing population, degrading infrastructure, and an alarming energy crisis. And cities just happen to be at the intersection of those 3 problems. So just to further highlight what is the importance of the built environment in this framework, let us look at some statistics. 55% of the world population currently lives in cities, and that number will go up to 70% by 2050. We also know that there's an annual average cost of $40 billion associated to natural hazards, and about 60,000 deaths related to those. And we, as the built environment, represent 40% of the final energy consumption, most of it associated to conditioning needs for heating and cooling. So here at Northwestern, as part of our study of geomechanics and subsurface engineering, we try to address these global challenges in 3 different ways. First, through the mitigation and prevention of natural hazards, then to the effective and sustainable development of infrastructures through automation, and finally through the alleviation of the energy needs through energy harvesting and storage in the ground. Now, the geomechanics program at Northwestern consists of 3 faculty, each of which focuses on a diverse variety of research topics. Through a collaborative environment, they aim to tackle all of these problems in a comprehensive and competitive way, such that we can use modeling, we can use construction automation in an energy efficient and sustainable way. So the professors in geomechanics are Giuseppe Buscarnera, James Hamilton, and Alessandro Rotaloria. So now, just to give you a brief outlook of their research interest, I prepare a slide for each one. So Professor Buscanera's research interest can be summarized as follows. First of all, we have the study of natural hazards due to external disturbances. So the figure on the left shows that soil rheology can really determine how natural hazards occur. And soil slopes specifically can transit from a slow movement to a rapid flow. So the research objective here is basically to formulate analytical tools, theoretical tools, to study at different space-time scales how these geohazards occur and how to mitigate them. Furthermore, this lab study granular materials and using X-ray tomography, discrete element method simulations, and constitutive modeling that will be examining the macroscopic and microscopic features of granular materials under extreme loading conditions. Finally, the topic of interest is the study of heterogeneous and anisotropic behavior of porous rocks. So the role of stratigraphy, loading history, and boundary effects is critical at the generation of complex compaction bands. And this will be studied using finite element modeling using strain hardening elastoplastic models. So moving on to Professor Hamilton's research. Just as a general background, human beings move a remarkable quantity of earth for civil construction, for agriculture, and for mining. And it just happens to be that earth moving is a field where our scientific understanding is a little bit behind the technology itself. And technology, well, it could use a little bit of help from nature itself. When it comes to earth moving, we have still some things to learn from ants, moles, and other creatures. So the problem is that earth moving itself has been addressed more by the people who design the machines rather than those who study the mechanical behavior of soils. So earth moving is really a field that lies at the intersection of geotechnical and mechanical engineering. So it doesn't matter whether it is for civil construction or even planetary exploration. The overarching goal of Professor Hamilton's group is to develop and validate these models for these fundamental processes in soils. Finally, moving to Professor Rotoloria's lab. At the Mechanics and Energy Laboratory, which I am part on, we basically aim to understand, characterize, and predict the impact of energy transfers on the structure, properties, and behavior of geomaterials. This means that we study how the structural modifications due to perturbations, including heat and electric loads, affect the capability of geological materials to sustain loads, to allow thermal transfer, and to allow fluid permeation. And this can go to the scale of several meters to many kilometers. So in more general terms, we're looking at the fundamental structure level and behavior connection. So in a much bigger picture, our research goals are to invent new geotechnologies that will help conserve the natural and built environments and will foster a sustainable and resilient urban development. We also aim to develop geosystems that will allow us to harvest and capture energy in the ground. So as I've been talking, you can already guess that our investigation approach is multidisciplinary, aiming to cover various aspects of research, starting from experimental laboratory testing, going to analytical studies, to numerical modeling, and even full-scale in situ testing. Furthermore, I want to highlight something important about our research, and it's that all of our research goes in hand with the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development. So in our goal for finding sustainable, resilient, and smart infrastructures, our work also helps reduce inequality. all of it while tackling climate change and finding new alternative clean energy. So now that you have all of this background, I would like to tell you something about what I do here at Northwestern. So soil as a material can be sometimes overlooked. But until we figure out how to basically build floating buildings, we will have to deal with soil because they're responsible for the structural integrity of everything around us. The problem is that soil get degraded over time, as I said before, due to natural hazards, due to rising natural hazards. And this makes most structures more and more fragile, being more and more vulnerable to the next natural hazard. So we as engineers have aimed to improve or engineer, enhance, and control these materials to resist these perturbations. And talking from the point of view of soils, the prevalent method to do so is jet grouting, which, as you may know, involves the high pressure injection of cement solutions into the ground. But there is a problem with jet grouting, and it's that it requires a lot of energy and it releases a lot of CO2. So much that on 1 year, it is equivalent to what 3 billion trees can absorb in 40 years, just to put that perspective. So this is where I come into play. That is the rationale behind my PhD, because we can try to find alternatives, something better. And to do so, we took a look at what nature does, because nature is usually right. So in nature, soils and rocks are accompanied by ions. Ions that are formed due to dissolutions of chemicals over thousands of years in the pore water. So over centuries, these ions present in soils migrate and react over time, forming precipitates of minerals that basically bind particles together just as a glue. So as part of my research, we aim to start a novel treatment using electric fields that will, over a matter of seconds, replicate these reactions that will precipitate minerals, simulating nature that would otherwise take hundreds of years. Now, the natural question after saying all of this is, but how? Well, we have two options right here. We can use whatever nature has provided for us. That means there are already ions inside the ground that we can use. And some of the more common ones are calcium, magnesium, ammonium, and sodium. So applying an electric field out of these will lead to reactions that will lead to calcium oxides, magnesium oxides, and hydroxides that will basically serve as adhesive between particles that will keep improve the structural integrity of soils. Our second alternative is what I like to call engineered pore fluids. That is where my research starts being highlighted. That is when we can start deciding what exactly to put inside soil to precipitate essentially whatever we desire, going from calcium carbonate to different types of silicates, to zinc and sodium and many other types of compounds. The problem is, well, how do we decide, how do we find out what to do next? Where does this engineered come into play? And that is when innovation starts. So as part of my research right now, we are currently trying to achieve calcite, that is calcium carbonate, as a binding crystals to in between sand grains. The problem is, where do we find the components that we need? And if we are trying to think outside the box, we can find some of these components in some of the most common places. So let us start with a common drink. Where will we find carbonate? And that comes into play in carbonated water, something that's very common and you can find in every store. So carbonated water, in conjunction with a source of calcium under an electric field, will lead you eventually to a precipitation of calcite, given this reaction right here. We are provided the calcium and the carbonate at different locations under the electrodes. The ions will migrate, eventually forming calcite, binding our soil and making it stronger. So how exactly do we study this? So let me give you a brief outlook of our experimental devices. We have a unique devices in the world that allow mechanical voltage and hydraulic control of all the conditions inside for us to study this very, very special and specific problem. We have platinum electrodes used to apply the electric field on our samples, on our sand samples, that will allow us to look at all these chemical reactions and look how these crystals affect the mechanical behavior of geomaterials. Just as a example of results, we can go from normal sand that you can find every day in the ground or in the beach to something resembling rock, something that's much more stronger, something that can help withhold much more loads, and something that's overall better for our built environment. Now, you may be asking, why is this all important? Well, and the reason is, this is important for infrastructure protection. As I said, from ever-growing natural hazards, we need more resilient and better ways to take care of our environment. And this is where this method comes into play. So we can amend all of these fractures that we have had. And it also helps with more resilient and much faster urban development. So just to summarize once again what we do here at the Geomechanics program at Northwestern, we innovate here. We try to look at different aspects of and different problems around the world. And we look at soil as a great potential source of solution for all of these problems, including natural hazards, construction, and energy. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much, and I'm open for any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Anthony. This is excellent. Any question for Anthony?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes.
So you mentioned applying electric fields to the soil and converting it into a solid form. So I know you showed a picture of the untreated state and the treated state. I just wanted to know if you faced any challenges in doing that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your question. One of the aspects that we had to deal with, when achieving these results was that depending on how much voltage you use, you can have an increase in temperature that at point it can be uncontrollable. The thing is that if we are using low voltage, you can avoid that problem and still achieve the desired result. So the key here is to use a low voltage, low energy treatment that will be just as effective as just using a high voltage one. Does that clear up your question?
Yeah, thank you for that.
Any other question?
So is this like intended to either replace or enhance like current practices of compacting soils, or how do you hope to use this?
Oh yes, thank you so much. Yeah, this is especially relevant because most of the current practice that we have drawbacks, and most of the drawbacks are related to the applicability of the current methods. Either you cannot apply them because of spatial constraints, because they're hard, you need a lot of machinery, because they might be very environmentally unfriendly, like using concrete, and because they might not be applicable in some situations. With this, you just need some electrodes, some very low electricity, and you will be able to apply this treatment. So that's what we're studying.
Very good, excellent. Any more questions?
Hi. So you
Yes.
talked about drawbacks, and I was wondering, so is this treatment reversible? Like, if ever in the future you wanted to like break down that building and turn it back to, I don't know, agricultural use, is this treated state like reversible or?
Thank you for your question. So so far we haven't considered the irreversibility of it. So we're just working into improving soil for more mechanical strength, better heat conduction, and decreasing fluid permeation. But we haven't looked at the other arrow coming back yet. This is a very novel treatment, and we have just started working on it a year ago or so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We are fantastically on time. It's 11:11, and our next speaker is Professor Marco Nie. He's a professor in our transportation engineering program. Marco?
I first need to unmute myself in order to.
Yeah, perfect.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yeah,
I'll share my screen.
You're all good. We see the slide, everything.
Well, okay, so I'm also the program director for transportation program here. So I want to welcome everyone to the open house. I'm glad to have this opportunity to give you a flavor of what transportation research look like in Northwestern. I actually debated a bit about what exactly I should talk about within 20 minutes I have. I could give you a general pitch about every exciting thing that is happening in transportation. But I wonder if that approach would leave many of you overwhelmed with a flood of information, especially for those of you who want nothing to do with transportation research. So I decided that I should instead focus on something that everyone can perhaps relate to. So hence the topic I call it Tale of Two Markets that basically attempts to explain, the fundamental differences between Uber and taxi. So I'm certain that everyone here must have taken taxi and Uber. If not Uber, definitely something like Uber. So you should have some intimate knowledge about them so that you could understand or appreciate what I'm trying to talk about here. Okay. So Uber started in 2007, 2008, and they have since grown very, very fast. They went to IPO in 2019. So you can see the rapid rise of Uber is largely enabled by the smartphone-enabled mobile computing, right? It creates unprecedented connectivity between taxi drivers and passengers, right? So one of the greater misses about social platforms like Uber is the so-called network effect. So the story goes like this. Okay, so because of the better connectivity, okay, the platform achieves greater efficiency by reducing the transaction cost, right? So that is the cost of finding customers, passengers, and the cost of doing the payment and so on and so forth. So this advantage in turn will attract more users, both passengers and drivers to the platform. And as more drivers, as more users begin to use the platform, the cross-site network effect will kick in, which basically means that it now becomes even easier for drivers and users to find each other, right? And this would further reduce the cost and improve the efficiency. And you can see that this story will eventually imply a virtuous circle, okay? And that will basically means a bigger players will have a bigger advantage, and eventually the bigger player will become the biggest, and that will be the winner take all, okay? And so this story basically fuels the very high value of Uber when it is still a private company. Uber was the largest, was expected to be the largest IPO in the history of IPO, right? But if you look at their performance since then, I mean, they didn't really live up to this hype, right? So they keep losing money. Uber and both Uber and Lyft keep losing money, and when they become bigger, they lose more money. In 2019, they lose close to $10 billion. And their stock definitely didn't live up to the hype, right? So Uber starts at $45, and now they're slightly above water. Okay, they gained almost 20 years. Almost 2 years later, they gained, I think, about 10%, and Lyft is still well below water. Okay, so definitely their performance is miserable compared to some of this blockbuster growth like Zoom, which we're currently using. Now, also, the so-called winner take it all does not really materialize either, right? So the Uber certainly did not dominate anywhere in the world. They didn't even dominate here in North America. They are still competing with Lyft, Via, and Curb. They were basically driven out of the entire market in China, right, by the Chinese version of Uber. So there appears there's no winner take it all so far. Given the discrepancy between the reality and the theory, we began to ask the question: is this just a growing pain, or is there maybe something deeper is going on? I don't have to tell you that my answer, my opinion is yes, there is something going on here. In fact, this story about network effect does not really add up, right? In fact, the cross-site network effect in Uber is actually checked by what we call the efficiency paradox, right? So there is a reason why Uber does not do as well as the story has promised. So the rest of my presentation is going to be I will try to explain why this is the case, why to back my claim up. Okay, so I start from this so-called spatial matching theory. So forget about all these equations. I'm not going to talk about equation notation, but just imagine you are a passenger pops up in the market, right in the middle, the blue guy. Okay, and imagine at the moment when you pops up in the market, there's all these vacant taxis around you. Okay, so one of the key performance index that drives all the dynamics in the market is wait time. So how much time are you going to wait until you get a vehicle to be matched with you? Okay, and that green circle in the middle is what we call the hill area. So traditionally owning a vehicle, get into that area. Can you then match with that vehicle? Okay, so the wait time depends on how soon a vacant vehicle gets into that circle, right? So this is what we call the spatial matching theory. Very simple, right? Now think about taxi and Uber. Now taxi has a relatively small circle, right? Because in the taxi market, pretty much you have to see the driver. You have to have an eye contact with the driver in order to hail the taxi. So you have to wait until a taxi gets into that green circle in order to say, I'm matched with the driver. Okay, so your ability to hail a taxi is limited by that radius. Uber changed this completely, right? Because now you have smartphone, you basically have access to every taxi surround you. You literally have every taxi in the city, no matter how far away these taxis are from you, right? So theoretically, you should have unlimited access. And so this seems to give Uber a tremendous advantage over taxi, as everybody would have suspected. But while we are saying Uber not necessarily is better, their efficiency is not necessarily better, I'll try to explain this using this diagram. Okay, so here comes the topic, so-called the tale of two markets. So on the top, these are the low density market, A and B. Okay, in the low density market, you can see that in plot A, there is a passenger that is identified by the red dot. There are 5 vacant taxis around that passenger, right? But because of their direction, their driving directions, none of these taxis will eventually get into the red circle. Meaning, even though there are indeed 5 vacant taxis around the passenger, there's not going to be any match. B is Uber in the low density market. So you can see Uber in this case will be doing very well. There are 5 taxis, and all of those vehicles will be matched with the passenger. So the passenger will be very happy, right? So in this case, there's no question Uber is significantly better than taxi. Now, the bottom is another. The bottom C is a high density market. Now you can see in the high density case, the high density actually improve taxi passengers matching probability, right? Because there are so many of them. There are passengers and taxi everywhere. So there's always going to be someone is going to be hated by a vacant taxi. Okay. So overall, the productivity will go up dramatically when the high density, when the market density goes up. Now D is Uber in a high density market situation. Now everyone still has access to all the vacant taxis. That's true. However, you have to remember there are many other passengers in the same area, and they have exactly same access to the vacant taxis as you do. And as a result of that, the platform who is running this business, they have to try to find a way to distribute the vacant taxis among the passengers. Okay? And we call that competition or congestion. And because of this congestion, Uber will lose efficiency in the high density market. That is a fundamental reason why you will have many people would prefer to use taxi in downtown areas rather than Uber, because you can literally take more time to get an Uber than hail a taxi off street. Okay, I'll show you this. I show you this formula, this one formula on the identified as red. I can show you the wait time because of the matching mechanisms. The wait time in the taxi and the Uber market will be different. Okay, for the taxi, here the most important parameter to see is the lambda 0. So lambda 0 is the vacant vehicles density. So you can see in the case of taxi, the vacant taxi, the average wait time is inversely proportional to lambda 0, which is the vacant vehicle density. Okay. In the case of Uber, the wait time is inversely proportional to the square root of the vacant vehicle density. So this basically says, as the vacant density increase, taxi's wait time will drop faster than in the case of Uber. Another difference between the two formulas is that for the Uber, pi 0 here is passenger density. So how many people are waiting for taxi? You can see for the Uber, if you have more passengers waiting, your wait time will go up, but this is not true for the taxi. Okay, so those are the fundamental difference between taxi and Uber. Now let me just show you one more diagram. This one will take a little bit more time to explain. I hope I have time. Yes, I have time. So this product compares productivity of taxi and Uber. Okay, here the regress lines illustrates the production function of taxi and Uber, and the production function here represent the number of trips produced as a function of the number of waiting passengers and number of vacant vehicles, shown as X here. Okay, so here the slope of the line represents what economists will call returns to scale. Okay, so what I can tell you is that the slope, if the slope is bigger, if you have a steeper line, it means the mode has a greater returns to scale. Okay, so clearly here you can see the blue line, the taxi line. It has a greater returns to scale. Note that these are from data. Okay, these blue points are from data that we collected. And the red dots are Uber, and you can see taxi clearly has a better returns to scale, meaning it has a better efficiency. What is the intercept here tells you the total factor productivity, which measures the technology advantage of the mode. And clearly here, Uber had a greater advantage in terms of technology, which you would expect. Now, finally, what I want to say is that the slope actually, you can tell whether or not taxi or Uber has an increasing returns to scale. In this case, taxi has a slope that is larger than 0.5. Okay, that means taxi would have an increase in returns to scale, whereas Uber would have a constant returns to scale. So in fact, taxi enjoys the economy of scale, meaning if taxi market becomes bigger, taxi will actually become more efficient, not Uber. When Uber becomes bigger, it does not necessarily more efficient. It does not necessarily become more efficient. Okay. So I think I'm right on time. What is the tale of two markets? This is a takeaway. So in low density market, Uber could help passengers access more vacuum vehicles. And as a result of that, it could lower the likelihood of very long waits. I'm sure if you have used Uber, you would experience that. Okay. However, in the high density market, Uber will induce competition that will eventually undercut the network effect, especially the cross-site network effect. And this will weaken the overall efficiency of the trip production. So what we can learn from this about the future of Uber and taxi? But first of all, the Uberization of ride-hail, Uberized ride-hail, it has relatively limited impact on efficiency, despite you might have been told. So we believe that ride-hail will remain to be a relatively expensive mode until autonomous driving finally take over, right? But Uber recently just sold their autonomous driving business. So I guess it's not gonna happen very soon. And we don't think ride-hail industry will likely to see a winner take it all. It's just because the industry does not enjoy a very strong increase in returns to scale. And so as a customer, you should expect a variety of services that will be provided by different firms with different value propositions. That's all I have. And here's a paper that you can read if you are interested. And this research is supported by National Science Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Marco. We do have time for a few questions. This was outstanding. Any question for Professor Nia?
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Have you compared the overall VMT of ride-hail versus taxi services in high or low density markets?
You mean vehicles miles traveled?
Mm-hmm.
We have not. The focus here, because when we measure the trip production, we mostly measure number of trips generated, because that's the essential output of the market. I suspect this is totally speculation. I think Uber is likely to generate more VMT because they have to do the pickup, right? They have to do the pickup phase. Really has the potential to increase their VMT dramatically.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other question?
I have two questions, but I want to make sure students go first. Okay, well, I'm going to rush in then. Marco, how does Lyft keep operating when they're so far underwater?
What?
Is that just they just have lots of investors that are enthusiastic. I guess I'm surprised.
Well, that was before, right? That was before the IPO. I mean, I know the Vision Fund and SoftBank, they put a lot of money in Uber. I mean, hoping they eventually will become the monopoly. I mean, I don't know how they do their math, but we just don't think they, their business model would add up. Their labor, they just cannot get rid of the labor cost, right? So the labor cost structure is there, and the fact that you still have to use exactly one driver to serve one passenger means that you cannot really have that narrow effect, right? If you can do, I mean, Uber is pushing very hard on the ride pooling and micro transit. That could actually improve their efficiency. But ultimately, I think only if they can use autonomous driving and take drivers out of the vehicle can they then really make big buck. Not now. I think now they're just like a big taxi company.
So that's my second question. We've always said for so many years that it's not a question of if we're going to see a shift to autonomous driving, it's the when. But it seems like we've backed off a little. Is that just because the pandemic has just thrown a wrench into everything, or is something deeper going on?
No, I still think we will. I still think the question is when. I think it depends on where it will happen first. Whether or not it will be in the consumer vehicle market or maybe in the commercial vehicle market, like buses or trucks. I think, and now I believe it's likely that it will happen sooner in the other markets, not necessarily in the consumer market. But I still believe, I said this before, I believe before I retire from Northwestern, we will say a lot of autonomous vehicles driving around. Okay, so if this does not happen, I just keep working here until it happens.
I'm kind of worried. I didn't want you to get on retirement there. My sense is that long haul freight is an area where it could easily happen, but we always worry about the displacement effects. Anyway, I stop. I do environmental chemistry, but I have to say I love hearing this range of talks and then finding unexpected connections either to my own work or to my interests. So thank you very much, Marco.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to all the speakers this morning. And again, let me echo what Professor Gray said. I think this was a very good overview of what the type of problems that our research addresses and how the different programs and the different researchers in our department really work together and with tools that can be applied to many different fields. And the system approach is where we are going next, because that is exactly how you develop tools, computational tools, that then can be applied to problems that are in different type of fields. And that is the type of research and type of interaction that you can expect by joining our department at Northwestern University. So let me give just a couple of minutes and then we adjourn this meeting. The afternoon, as you know, is going to be in Hopin. Many of you were probably there yesterday night for game night. I hope that was fun and they went well. This is the interface that you will see. Let me move this out of the way. And there are, if you go on the left-hand side, there are sessions and there are the booths, C department. So at lunch, there are all these lunch tables. So you will go in one of those lunch tables. You have an assigned table that you should have received in the information you got from us, different point. So please locate your table. You just click on it. And when you get here, you just share your audio, share your video, and you're in. The lunches will be groups of 9, 10 people with a couple of our faculty members. They are mixed of different areas because we want to emphasize and show this collaborative environment that we have. And after lunch, there is 1 hour in which I encourage you to explore our department. So you go to the booth area here, you click on this button, And there are a number of booths that show our experimental facilities for the environmental engineering and science experimental facilities, the geotechnical engineering, geomechanics, and the structural engineering infrastructure materials. There is also a transportation center expo. Also, I want to mention that if you click here, you will see, second. Yeah, down here, there are all documents. And in particular, at 1 p.m., there is a live presentation of the transportation center. That, however, is going to be on Zoom, but you will have there in the booths, you will have the link so that you can go listen to the transportation center presentation and then come back. There is another booth where there is a video of research highlights of the environmental engineering and science student research. There is a booth of department life where you'll find a lot of different pieces of information about activities that are extracurricular, things that our students do when they don't work and study. Resources that are information about might be helpful for your transition to Northwestern, how to find things, get an apartment, things like that. And I strongly encourage to visit the booth of research. If you go here, there is a slideshow, and you can click, either just run it or click here. You'll see different faculty member. You will have click on it, and you will have either short video or other pieces of information about our research. So this site is going to be open also throughout the day today and then tomorrow. So if you don't have time or you're in a different time zone, you can come back here and look at all this information. Now, another part I want to mention again now in the session part is if you scroll down, there are 4 rooms for the different programs. And so that's where you go at 2 p.m. So at 2 p.m., you're going in one of those, depending on what your program is, you go in one of those rooms. And there will be initially a short presentation by the program coordinator to describe the program, requirements, courses, things like that. And then at 2:20, the meetings with the different faculty start. And so again, you access this general room for the program, and then you scroll down. And so when the time comes that you have to meet with a specific faculty member, you just click on the link that you can see, and that will take you to this virtual office of the faculty member, and you will talk and discuss and then leave and move on to another meeting. Everybody should have received the schedule, so you have exactly the time at which you will need to go into those virtual offices. If you don't have that, please contact me or Melissa, and we will help you find your meetings. Also, at any given time, if you have any problem, with microphones, with anything, you can go to the help desk, and there will be somebody that can help you. If, for example, your microphone doesn't work, so how do I communicate with the help desk? Well, you can use the chat, and so you can ask for help that way. Also, if you go in any session, if you scroll down, there is a PDF with troubleshooting tips. So if you have problems, then you can also try some of those things. I hope you will enjoy the afternoon with us. It's 11:38, so we are pretty much on time. So we have a break, and then I'll see you back at noon US Central Time for our lunch meetings. Thank you very much, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.